Salam Sejahtera, Salam Ramadan, and a lovely morning to everyone. Welcome to MQA's webinar on Code of Practice for Program Accreditation, Open and Distance Learning, COPPA ODL. My name is Lillian, and I am the Senior Director of Accreditation in MQA. Ladies and gentlemen, the pandemic, which has landed upon us more than a year ago, has drastically disrupted and changed our usual way of doing things, be it in our personal or even professional lives. In the new normal today, many of us here are forced to acquire new set of skills on a daily basis. We become instant online experts of technical know-hows and technological tools, which we often use to bridge the distance that separates us during this pandemic. We drown ourselves in daily online meetings, online teaching and learning, online training, online shopping, online this and online that. So certainly, while some of us are surviving the new normal, many are still struggling with the uncertainties. So today in this webinar, we see how the pandemic has caused a change in the higher education landscape and how institutions of higher learning are now making changes to the delivery of their programs from a conventional face-to-face physical classroom setting to an open and distant learning mode to adapt and survive in the new normal. Ladies and gentlemen, dear listeners, the Code of Practice for ODL or COPPA ODL serves as the main quality assurance document that sets the minimum requirement that all institutions of higher learning that intend to embark in offering programs through the ODL mode. So since 2011 to date, MQA has made several improvements and changes to the Code of Practice to incorporate the dynamic changes and developments in ODL. And the latest document published in MQA, the COPPA ODL, in 2019 is known as the COPPA ODL, and this version is actually available on the MQA website. Ladies and gentlemen, for your information, effective 1st July 2020, all applications for provisional and full accreditation programs offered through ODL must adhere to the minimum requirements set by the COPPA ODL. In a recent development, considering that many conventional institutions have now started conducting online courses during the pandemic, MQA has issued a notification letter dated 29 December 2020. And in this notification, it allows conventional institutions of higher learning to apply for provisional accreditation for a new program without having the same program offered in a conventional setting. And these are all subjected to the criteria of evaluation outlined. So prior to this notification, institutions must have obtained full accreditation for a conventional program and satisfy all conditions outlined before they are allowed to embark on an ODL program. So now, under this new notification, institutions can now offer new programs directly through the ODL. So how can institutions of higher learning prepare themselves before embarking on an ODL mode? What does it take to offer an ODL program? What are some of the minimum standards and requirements under the COPPA ODL? Are institutions of higher learning in Malaysia ODL ready? So I'm sure these are burning questions among us here today now. And who better to answer those questions than the two renowned experts in ODL that we have invited with us here as panelists today. Let me introduce you to both our panelists. We have with us today Associate Professor Dr. Andy Liu, who is currently the Pro-Vice Chancellor in HELP University, Malaysia. He has held senior administrative positions in various conventional and ODL institutions. He is also one of the pioneer staff who works closely with the founding members in establishing 2 tertiary institutions in Malaysia, the Alliance University College of Medical Sciences and Wawasan Open University. He is a resource person and appointed assessor for MQA as well as the Ministry of Higher Education, and has served as the chairman for the development of guidelines to good practices for APEL at MQA and the Code of Practice for ODL, which we will be discussing today. Dr. Andy is also no stranger at the international level, having networks and involvements in international projects and assignments in ODL. So welcome to our webinar, Dr. Andy. He will be speaking to you shortly.
Thank you, Lillian.
Thank you. Our second panelist is Professor Kuldeep Kaur. Professor Dr. Kuldeep Kaur has strong background in ODL, teacher education, and in second language development. She has developed substantial expertise in open and distance learning as a leading academic in Open University Malaysia, as well as a consultant and instructor with Wawasan Open University, Asia E-University, and Intel University. She has also developed training expertise in the management of ODL programs, ODL instructions, and writing self-instructional materials. So prior to her joining the Open University Malaysia, Prof. Kuldeep was an associate professor at the Faculty of Education, University of Malaya. So she is now currently an assessor with the MQA panel of ODL experts. Dr. Andy will be speaking to us on empowering higher education institutions and learners through the COPPA ODL, while Prof. Kuldeep will be sharing on effective practices in open and distance learning based on her vast experiences in the open universities. So before I hand the mic or the screen over to Dr. Andy, allow me to inform the participants some very basic house rules to ensure that we are able to maximize and gain most out of this webinar session. Each of our panelists will be given 20 to 25 minutes for their respective sessions, and this will be followed by a Q&A session at the end. All right, so to the participants, you may send your questions to us through the pigeonhole. The link, I believe, can be found in the chat box. It has been shared in the chat box. So please, if you have any questions, do post them in the pigeonhole. The link is on the chat box. And for those listeners following us on the YouTube channel, kindly scan the QR code, which is available on the slides presented. So without further ado, and let's not keep everyone waiting, Dr. Andy, the screen is all yours.
All right, thank you very much, Puan Lillian. Good day and salam sejahtera, fellow colleagues from near and far. And once again, can you hear me? Sorry, I forgot to check on this, Lillian.
Yes, we can hear you clearly, Doctor.
All right. Once again, terima kasih moderator Puan Lillian yang disanjungi atas mada manismu, and of course your generous introductory remarks yang telah mengusik jiwa saya. And in the custom of Malay, orang berbudi, kita berbahasa. So before we begin the journey of COPPA ODL in the online platform or the Pesada online ini, allow me to share serangkap pantun to start off the pagi yang mulia ini. Tanak pulut ketupat tak jadi, kacau rendang hangit sekuali, ODL buah mulut sejak tadi, COPPA ODL disebut berkali-kali. Now in the next 20 minutes journey or so, I would be sharing some of the experiences, views, and expectations of the COPPA ODL in empowering higher education institution to fulfill its mandate. Now, this is very critical as COPPA ODL may serve as a mantra to drive online learning in these challenging times. And more so, ODL is also gaining its momentum in this 2020 and 2021. Now, this is the historical trail that led to the emergence of COPPA ODL, which have drawn us. I think there are more than 500 over participants this morning in the Zoom here, and converging in this online platform this morning. Now, it all started with the humble beginning in 2011, where the guideline of good practices on the delivery of ODL was first developed and published by MQA. Eventually, in 2012, this guideline has transformed into a code of practice. And finally, in 2019, the MQA and the Ministry of Higher Education has then decided to have a proper code of practice for program accreditation, particularly to cater to the needs of ODL program. And this is why all of us are converging in this online platform this morning for the better understanding or to iron out any ambiguity in relation to the standards embedded in the COPPA ODL. Now, in any review or development process, stakeholder engagement has always been viewed as a vital component in quality assurance. Likewise, in the development of this COPPA ODL, we have engaged with policymakers, higher education providers, industry players, and professional bodies. So this slide would actually tell you there have been a lot of engagement sessions that were conducted, that were done within the 2018, 2019, before the birth of the COPPA ODL. This engagement is very, very crucial because it has helped to build consensus and harmonizing the objectives of this COPPA ODL. Now, this is the circular that Puan Lilian has roughly or touched on just now, where all HCPs have been duly informed of the birth of this COPPA ODL through this circular in 2019. And you would probably remember, most of us here in this platform, that effective 1st July 2020, all ODL programs that will be conducted via open distance learning, be it with provisional accreditation status or full accreditation status, must comply to the standards indicated in this COPPA. Now, a recent development which many would have welcomed it positively, especially the conventional institution, is this circular dated 29 December 2020. Now, in the past, for conventional institutions to roll out ODL programs, they are bound by the condition where the program must first be offered in a conventional mode, number one, and secondly, it must obtain full accreditation before the institution can actually apply for the program to be conducted via ODL. So meaning, whichever programs that the institution decide to offer as an ODL program, the program must gain full accreditation in the conventional mode program. However, with this circular of 29 December 2020, the MQA has lifted this barrier where even the program is not fully accredited, or even if it's a new program, the institution may apply to be, the institution may apply for the programs to be conducted via ODL. However, there are certain conditions and rules that the institution must comply. So therefore, I would strongly suggest that if we are a higher education provider in Malaysia, it is best to get access to this circular if we are still not aware of this, because there will be some conditions which is actually not binding, but helping the institution to roll out the ODL program. Now, you would understand, as I mentioned just now, in the past, higher education institutions who are not open universities or not having the status of open university status, they can offer ODL program with the condition that I mentioned just now. It must be fully accredited under the conventional mode. And this is no longer binding, all right? Now, having reached this stage of deliberation, perhaps a very pertinent question, which I think some of us in this platform would have known or would have heard, or some of us would still be wondering, how do we actually classify a program as an ODL program? Because when we develop a program and submit the MQA01 for provisional accreditation, we have to decide whether it is going to be an ODL program or it is under the conventional program under the blended learning approach. So the pertinent question would be, how do we classify a program as an ODL program? Now, the yardstick is very, very simple. There are two conditions here. Number one, at the program level, if more than 60% of the courses are delivered via ODL, therefore, this program will be deemed as an ODL program. Now, I repeat, this is referring to the number of courses in a program, all right? The second one would be at the course level. So at the course level, we would then be asking ourselves, how would we deem a course as an ODL course or a course as a conventional course? This is also very, very simple. As long as there is at least 80% of the student learning time delivered via ODL, then that course will be regarded as an ODL course. Now, let me provide you a very simple example here, very quickly here. Supposing in a program, there are 30 courses. There are 30 courses, course 1 until 30, and each course carries 3 credits. So if it is carrying 3 credits, meaning if we look at the course level, 80% of the SLT would be 96 hours. So meaning if 96 hours of the SLT is conducted via ODL or via online, then that particular course is known as an ODL course. So if we look at the number of courses we have here, it will go back to this first condition where more than 60% of the courses are conducted via ODL. So if 60% of the 30 courses in this program, it would be 18 courses. So this is to tell us that if there are 19 courses, because we are talking about more than 60% of the 30 courses, if there are 19 or more courses are conducted via ODL, then the entire program would be deemed as an ODL program. So this is the beginning point for any institution who will or who may decide to offer the program as an ODL program. So make sure this criteria is fulfilled before we even submit the ODL program submission to MQA, because this is where, when the application reaches MQA, they will then look at this particular aspect, whether to process that program as an ODL program or a conventional program. Now, the next question that probably all of us would be asking, what would be this COPPA ODL? What would be the purpose of this COPPA ODL? Primarily, we are looking at serving four main stakeholders. Number one here, as you can see, for the full-fledged ODL institutions like OUM, AEU, WOU, just to name a few. Secondly, would be the dual mode institutions. Now, dual mode institutions are institutions that are allowed to roll out ODL programs, that are allowed to even roll out conventional programs that are not bound by the 30% limit of the program. So these dual mode institutions are, just to name a few, like Al Madina, Sagi University, Uniraza, Veritas, UNITA, and Genovasi. Now, thirdly, it is the conventional institutions. Now, we have a lot of conventional institutions in Malaysia currently. And I think about more than 70% are actually conventional institutions. So the conventional institutions that are intending to offer certain suites of ODL programs, they would then adhere to the standards embedded in the COPPA ODL. Now, please be mindful on the policy matters here, where the Ministry of Higher Education has indicated that for conventional institutions to roll out ODL programs, they can only do 30% of the total programs that they have in-house of their current program. All right. And finally, the purpose of this COPPA ODL is for certain conventional institutions that may offer certain ODL courses in the conventional programs. For example, if they have a master program with 12 courses and they decide to then say, yes, this program is still under the conventional license, but I want 2 or 3 courses to be delivered via ODL or via online. And this is where they would then be guided by what is inscribed in the standards of the COPPA ODL. Now, in this slide, we are able to see that under the COPPA ODL, as in any other COPPA document, it will have 7 quality assurance areas of evaluations. And this will be the reference point for the various audit exercises, whether it is provisional accreditation, PA, full accreditation, FA, compliance and maintenance audit, or even for the purposes of continuous quality improvement. Now, in the next 6 slides that I will be presenting or I will be running through, the granular details will be deliberated by Prof. Kudit. And this would cover aspects like stakeholders of ODL and how ODL as a vehicle that will promote flexible learning. And also this, and also the characteristics of ODL. And we understand that ODL is a form of learning where it can be distinguished by these 4 characteristics. There's always a separation between the teacher and the learner, the flexibility, the accessibility, and the various media that is being used to deliver the learning content and to engage with learners. Now, some of you who have been with us or who have attended the many engagement sessions conducted by MQA, we will always remind participants or remind stakeholders that ODL falls within these 2 vital continuum, which are the time and space continuum. Now, these 2 continuums, as we understand, intersect, and their coordinates are numbered in the 4 quadrants. And I'm pleased, or we are rather pleased to inform that the 4 quadrants are the standards embedded in the COPPA ODL under Area 3, learning support services, and Area 5 under educational resources of the COPPA ODL. In the interest of time, I think we will not dwell into the nitty-gritty of these 4 quadrants, but we will highlight the salient points of these 4 quadrants later in the subsequent slide. Now, this is also, these are the barriers that ODL will be able to overcome, which many of us would appreciate. And the various associated terminologies related to ODL, the more or less is like a learner-centered education, open learning, correspondence, or the education as in the past. And the salient points of COPPA ODL actually covers the learning support services, the face-to-face contact, and the academic staff. Again, this is the prelude of what is coming in the next few slides. Now, the reason we are converging this morning, I think the gist is actually coming from the next few slides that we will be sharing. The key features of the COPPA ODL. Now, we understand when LAN migrated to MQA, all the LAN documentation were transformed into the MQA 0102, where it has 9 areas. So in the COPPA ODL, these 9 areas have been consolidated to 7 areas, where 2 areas with close affinity were merged. For example, the Area 1 and Area 2 in the past is merged under Area 1 now. Area 7 and Area 9 in the past has been merged under Program Monitoring and Review and CQI in the current COPPA ODL. And in the COPPA ODL, there is only one standard. There is no more segregation between enhanced or benchmark standard. So there is only one benchmark standard that we are looking at here. And in the COPPA ODL, we have also introduced a few new standards, especially where the programs are bound by program standards. There would be a certain requirements in terms of facilities for the execution of practicum or practical-based training. And the aspect on financial viability is also incorporated, and the importance of having a quality assurance unit, whether it is within the academic department or in the institution. Now, in the COPPA ODL, the onus of learning is actually on the learner. And there will be very minimal time or real time, either physical or virtual contact between the teacher and the learner. Hence, the following emphasis is important to ensure success in ODL learners. Now, this thing known as SIM, self-instructional materials, I believe there have been many inquiries from higher education institution. What is it that we can deem as a SIM, or what is it that we cannot regard as a SIM? So what is important here, and I'm very sure most of us here would understand that this self-instructional material, or nowadays there are certain sectors or school of thoughts that have regarded this as the self-learning materials, because the focus is on the learning of the students. So this material is actually a ready-made material, and it will serve as a guide to take the journey, or to take the students through the entire journey of their learning. And as we understand just now, in an ODL approach, there will be minimal interaction between the teacher and the learner. So in the absence of the teacher, this self-instructional material will be there to serve as a guide. So in short, this self-instructional material must be self-explanatory, self-contained, self-directed, and self-motivated. All right. Now, the next thing that is, of course, very crucial, and we have seen how important this aspect is from the COVID pandemic that has knocked on our doors in 2020 and even now in 2021. IT facilities in terms of bandwidth, server, the different apps that we use to conduct online tutorials or online lectures are very, very important to support online learning. And this is where the higher education institution must have a certain commitment in terms of resources on the infrastructure and infrastructure here. The next question that most of the HEP would probably ask, in an ODL program, how many hours of tutorials do I need? How many face-to-face tutorial? There are two things that we need to understand here. Tutorials here need not be physical. It's not bound by physical face-to-face tutorial. With the advent of technology, this can now be done through online. So the institution can decide whether to do it through online or to have the physical face-to-face tutorial. This is the first point. The second point is then how much hours would the institution require to contribute to this face-to-face tutorial. Now in the COPPA ODL, it does not state X number of minimum hours or X number of maximum hours that you need to have as a face-to-face tutorial. What we can advise higher education institution here is that there must be a certain quantum or allocated time, student learning time for face-to-face tutorial, whether it is online or whether it is a physical face-to-face tutorial. So over here, the yardstick or the benchmark that most institutions have used is in a semester, either you have 3 tutorials, and depending if your semester is a 14-week semester of learning, you may have 3 tutorials or you may have 2 tutorials. Now, these tutorials are very, very important because students would deem this as very, very crucial because this is where they are able to interact on real-time basis with the teachers. All right. Now, the next one, the question that most institutions would probably ask is learning management system. What system can I use, or what system can the institution deem as a learning management system, or whether MQA would allow this this particular system that institution adopt as a learning management system. Now, a very simple rule here is this. An LMS should be able to help the institution to propagate the content via online. So meaning there must be content propagation too. And we understand there are a lot of applications out there nowadays that some people have used as their LMS platform. So the criteria here is ensure that the LMS has this various tools that we are going to share. Number one, it must have the content propagation tool. Secondly, it must have collaborative learning tool. So meaning there would be promoting, or rather a tool to promote sharing of knowledge between the teachers and learners. It could be in the form of forum, and there would be communication tool. There would be assessment or evaluation tool where they can conduct quizzes, exams, allow marking, and the system is able to be integrated with other existing systems like the student information system, the digital library, the Turnitin, the anti-plagiarism software, and etc. The other aspect the LMS should have is that it must allow plugins, because certain times there are learning technologies that evolve. And when learning technologies evolve, we want this to be one of the features in the LMS. So this is where we would then expect plugins to be embedded in the LMS. And of course, with the advent of technology, the LMS should have the properties of data analytics. And we know that data mining or big data is very, very important, and there will be lots or nebulous data residing in the LMS platform. So the institution must be able to retrieve the data for analysis. Let me give you one example. The number of hours learners log into LMS. Where did they spend most of the time in a particular course? Is it in the learning materials in the forum? All this data would be useful for the institution to improve the learning support services to the learners. And of course, there will be many other applications that can be used to conduct online or virtual classes. Now, the other learning support services that in an ODL program would be digital library, where it can be accessed 24/7, meaning students can actually log in to hunt for reference materials anywhere, anytime, as long as there is an internet connection. And in the recent circular by MQA, where the conventional institution is allowed to conduct ODL programs or to apply for programs to be conducted through ODL, even there is no full accreditation of that particular program in a conventional mode. This condition has been clearly outlined in the circular. There must be a specific unit or a specific department that coordinates the whole delivery of the ODL programs. Now, we understand there are some institutions could be doing it in a small scale. Yes, in that case, you may not have a specific unit or department, but probably there would be a task force or a committee to ensure there is proper coordination across the institution when we are running the ODL programs, because ODL programs may not be confined within a faculty, it may be across faculty. So this is one of the stipulation stated in the circular by MQA 2020. Now, the next one, which I think my colleague, Professor Kudip, will dwell on this very in detail shortly, that the academic staff and capacity building plays a crucial role in the delivery of ODL. All right, because we have to make sure that everyone is on the same platform, particularly the teachers, in terms of the expectations and the requirements of ODL. And the question that most institutions would ask is, in an ODL setup, you would have a core academic staff residing in this institution, and the core academic staff usually they are known as the course coordinators. And the course coordinators here, it is always bound by the 60% and 40% ruling by MQA, where 60% minimum must be full-time, 40% must be part-time. And the tutors here can be 100% part-time. So this is the ruling that we need to be mindful of when it comes to the 60-40. The 60-40, in fact, is referring to the course coordinator or the lecturers, in-house lecturers. The next point that we need to take note would be the students. We have trained the academic staff. We have ensured that proper professional and capacity building is done for the academic staff. The same would also apply for the students. Now, some students, they have left school for many, many years. And for them to come back to this higher education institution, they will be disoriented, they will be displaced, especially when it comes to an ODL setup. They would expect the institution to actually handhold them through the entire journey, which is not possible, like what they had gone through during their early diploma years or during the higher secondary school years. So this is where the orientation is very, very important to actually enlighten the students on the expectations of an ODL program and what are the kind of learning support services that the institutions have actually put in place to guide them from day one until they graduate at the end of the journey, right? And of course, there are certain institutions, open universities, as we know, they have a lot of regional and learning centers in the various states. These are actually the contact point between the students at the local level and the main campus wherever they are. So this is where some institutions would actually apply to the Ministry of Higher Education to set up the regional and learning centers. Now, to set up this, it is not an application to MQA, but an application to the Ministry of Higher Education. Now, this is just briefly outlining what is actually in the COPPA ODL. The flow of the content is basically the same as in the COPPA conventional. Now, the distribution of standards under the COPPA ODL 2019, it has been streamlined from 9 areas of evaluation into 7 areas, as we can see here. And in these 7 areas, there are actually 96 standards. And if colleagues can remember from the beginning, I did mention there is only one standard. There is no longer a segregation between enhanced and benchmark standards. All right, so there are 96 7 standards embedded in these 7 areas. Now, these are the distribution of all the standards in the 7 areas, and the COPPA ODL 2019 clearly outlined the QA standards right from the beginning of the development to the delivery, to the assessment, as well as to the monitoring and review of the ODL programs. Now, another aspect that the COPPA ODL is actually focusing on is harnessing the technology-enabled innovations to democratize access to higher education. And this is where the whole gist of it is actually embedded in the Area 5 educational resources. And of course, lastly, in the COPPA ODL, the purpose of segregating this from the conventional COPPA is that we want to establish a proper and structured way to document the application, particularly for delivery of ODL programs. Now, I think sooner or later, or in the near future, there will probably be one COPPA that caters for all, especially when we have seen how the COVID pandemic has disrupted higher education and online learning has now become a norm in the higher education sector, not only in Malaysia, but across the globe. All right. And we will open for a Q&A later if there are any ambiguity from members or participants on the 7 areas and the 96 standards embedded in the COPPA ODL. All right. And of course, many of us in this forum would be aware that these are the 2 documentation that relates to ODL. One is for the provisional accreditation and the other one is for the full accreditation. All right. So that concludes the brief introduction on the COPPA ODL, and I will pass this session back to Puan Lilian for the next session under Professor Kudip, and after that we will address all the questions that you may have posted in the pigeonhole. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Andy, for the sharing and the enlightenment on the COPPA ODL. I believe our viewers have had some clear and simple understanding of COPPA ODL. Of course, to view the document in full, COPPA ODL is made available on the MQA's website. So thank you very much for the sharing, and we will come back to you for the Q&A shortly. I believe that there are many burning questions among the participants with us today. I am very pleased to share with everyone and the panelists the number of audience. Our audience have recorded more than 1,000 listeners today. So I would also encourage that those who are actually listening in right now to be sharing the link with some of your friends or even colleagues who may be interested to know more about the COPPA ODL. So, and again, some house rules for those who have just joined us. Thank you for coming. And to the participants, you may send your questions to us through the pigeonhole, and the link of the pigeonhole can be found on the chat box, right? And the link on the YouTube, I think it's also shared in the chat box. And those viewers who are actually following us on the YouTube channel, please also scan on the QR code if you have any questions pertaining to COPPA ODL, which we will try to address towards the end of the presentation. So now, let us now also listen to another one of our panelists today, Professor Kuldeep Kaur. Professor Kuldeep will be sharing with us on her experiences going through various institutions of higher learning, especially the ODL institutions. So let us now listen to her experiences in her presentation, Effective Practices in ODL. Prof. Kuldeep, the floor is yours.
Thank you so very much, Lillian, and thank you, Andy, for that brilliant presentation. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you to the audience as well for being here. So I will begin now. I'm just waiting for my slides to pick up.
Okay, while we switch mics from the panelists, please feel free to do some light stretching if you are listening in. And once we are ready, we will be continuing the session, right?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Lillian. Thank you, Andy. Okay, let's move to effective practices. And I think the obvious can be stated here. We're looking at shifts in the educational landscape, not only in Malaysia, but also worldwide. These shifts are mainly a response to the trends in the labor markets, trends in global ways of communication, and also a culture of innovation, which many institutions have experienced. We're looking at trends that are influenced by digital skills. We're looking at flexibility within educational options. And we're also looking at, institutions leading in new ways of thinking and developing solutions for the many issues that we face every day. So here We have one example, which is the 2 years in university and 2 years in the industry, which many universities in Malaysia have taken up. Next. And you will see also that universities that have been offering traditional programs with limiting numbers of students and very, very specific ways of entering universities have now conceived of programs where there will be more openness, programs which can be offered to a wider audience. Next. I think a lot of this is in relation to the trends in labor markets in Malaysia and the requirements for young people and for people who have been in industry for time, for some time, people who have worked for a long time and need to upskill and so on. Next slide, please. If you look at what is happening around us, let me highlight to you some of the concepts which have become very familiar and which are, concepts that a lot of institutions are considering as they plan for their future. You're looking at Saluran Terbuka, which is an open channel, and virtual students, and ODL, open distance learning, and micro degree stacking, where we stack, qualifications in various courses and in various skills, and then to also take advantage of industry relevant courses and and the affordances of digitalization have allowed for very flexible entries. So next slide, please. We're looking at, a new way of operating universities. Next slide, please. Next. And as we look at all the different institutions that wish to come on board in ODL, or open and distance learning, I think at this juncture, it might be useful to unpack the concept of ODL a little bit and to look closely at what we mean when we say open and distance learning. Dr. Andy has pointed out a number of very salient features with regards to COPPA requirements and with regards to practical, ramifications of working within ODL guidelines. But really, what is important is for us to understand who we are targeting and how we're going to deliver programs that come under the banner of ODL. First of all, open refers to, target groups which do not come in through traditional forms of enrollment. Open is very much aligned to enrollment for individuals who are not able to commit to a full-time degree program or a full-time course load. So the target group is often individuals who are working, individuals who are adults, and individuals who need upskilling, whilst in a work program or within a situation where they might want to shift their skill set and might want to shift their working environment. We're also looking at qualifications which are of course, exam-oriented and also work-oriented qualifications, which are allowing individuals to be more flexible in terms of demonstrating what they can do. Appel is a very good example of these qualifications. We're looking at non-formal means of entry. We're looking at longer durations or shorter durations in programs and lots of options. Now, the critical element here is really distance, where, as Dr. Andy pointed out, location and learning space are critical elements in distance learning, where the student and the teacher, the student and the instructor are not in the same room or the same space, where in-person contact is reduced, where a lot of self-instruction is required, and where learning materials take on very different formats. Unlike books that were published and books that were published for individual readers and for lecturers to ponder over. Learning is essentially a broad, we can take a broad view of learning, and in ODL, you can think of achievement of program outcomes, of learning outcomes, and the acquisitions of knowledge and skills commensurate with the program of learning. Now, I've put online here because very, very often ODL is confused with online learning. Open distance learning often involves some kind of digitalization, some form of online learning, web-based, and using digital tools and providing access in a different mode, and interaction is also online. However, online and open are not to be confused, as I will highlight in my next slide. Next. The critical thing is that open universities and ODL, open distance learning programs, are a broader notion than just online. Open is not online, but open universities and open distance learning programs utilize a lot of internet-based and web-based environments and online forms of interaction in the program delivery, and also in terms of assessment and interaction of very different levels. So I want to put it out there that the two are not, whilst the two are not equal, online is a subset often of ODL programs. The thing about distance between the institution and the location of the learner, or the distance caused by less frequent contact, or distance caused by an inability to reach physical environments of learning, must be bridged, and distance has to be bridged with a number of different ways, and one of them is the self-instructional materials, another is online platforms for interaction, and a third is in-person lectures, which many universities do conduct. An important dimension of ODL is to understand that learning is not always an easy, straightforward journey. Learning for anyone. We hear a lot of platitudinal statements where individuals are told that adults know how to learn. Lecturers know how to do this. They've done this a long time. Adults are familiar, and just because someone is familiar with social media and interactive forms of accessing information does not mean that the learning is easy. It is important that we bridge whatever skills that are required, or gaps in requirements for students. It is important that we use as many of the affordances of digitalization as we can in order to bridge these gaps and to make learning successful for all students, and for teachers and instructors to make that bridge a little more accessible to all students. Next slide. The important question all institutions must ask themselves is whether they are ready for ODL. And I have thought of three main areas of readiness as being critical to the success of ODL programs. And one of them being institutional readiness, whether or not the institution is effectively able to deliver open and distance learning programs. And I will give details of institutional readiness in a short while. The second is whether the institution is ready to develop student capacity, and whether the institution is able to prepare students for ODL programs that require strong self-management and study skills on the part of the learner. You will also realize that instructors also have to be a part of developing student capacity, and instructors are a very critical part of institutional readiness. And the institutional commitment to both delivery and for building student capacity has to be very, very strong. And this is done to a very large extent by the interaction design that we put together. And interaction is at many levels, and we need to design interactions that will make use of, best possible formats and frameworks that to foster learning among students. We've realized through many years of ODL experience that instructors and learners learn on the job. Management, members of the institutions management also learn as we go along, and we improve as we go along. However, we now know that some degree of readiness before you embark is very necessary, and it's a critical component of delivering online programs that are useful and will deliver learning. Next slide, please. So the first area of readiness, institutional readiness, broadly involves 4 different components, and there may be others, and there may be subsets of these 4 components. However, these 4 would be critical for ensuring that your higher education provider is ready to deliver, and your education provider is actually able to deliver programs that are effective in ensuring learning. The first is curriculum planning. And although, the subjects and the courses in any field are pretty much similar, the way in which we conceive of outcomes and how they translate to courses, and the content that we make decisions about for students to access learning is very important. And one of the areas that has been looked at very closely in terms of curriculum is to offer curricula that allow for experiential learning and self-directed learning opportunities. This simply means that the tasks that you assign to students can have a combination of real-world tasks and tasks that will actually draw on students' experience as they prepare for, their assignments and for the examinations. There is a certain level of memorization. There's a certain amount of content that everybody must know and must learn for any program. But there are also ways of working on, the content in a way that you can work on tasks either in groups or individually to realize real-world outcomes. For example, if there is an internet related problem in the university, can the task be given to graduate students to actually solve that internet problem? That would draw on their experience and would give them some degree of autonomy to actually come up with to develop solutions for that problem. The second is training and CPD. Pedagogical skills for integrating in-person and online instruction are new to many instructors. And we must realize that in Malaysia, many instructors have not gone through a program of study where they are trained in higher education, teaching and learning. And there has to be some degree of training. There has to be some level of continuous professional development for academic staff, for support staff, and for management staff. and for management to actually come on board and understand what is required actually for integrating in-person and online instruction. You know, and to sort of, you know, look at the multiple delivery options and make critical decisions about how best to deliver on time and on target for a variety of learners. The third area which Dr. Andy has expounded on in quite some detail is self-instructional learning materials. There are many ways of doing this, and although, you know, we have ideas about what is purposive, what is fit for purpose, what is well curated, and content that is accessible, we also need to think about the form that these self-instructional learning materials take. There are universities that have created from scratch whole modules, whole texts that contain guidance and support and tasks, questions for learners, and guided learners through all the content that is necessary. But self-instructional materials have also taken the form of textbooks and PowerPoint slides, which may not in and of them by themselves be sufficient for guiding learners. So if material is taken, ready-made material is taken, such as textbooks and PowerPoint slides and materials from other avenues, from other institutions, then the institution has to create some kind of wraparound module or wraparound guidance for students to understand how, you know, content and tasks are related to the learning outcomes for the program of study and for the program outcomes themselves. Now, self-instructional materials have received a lot of attention, both in Malaysia and outside, and we have ways of doing this which are more effective than others. And as Dr. Andy has indicated, there has to be a very strong team that leads any institution in the writing of self-instructional materials. And this team also takes into cognizance the training requirements and the continuous professional development of all staff. And the team also works directly with course leaders and course coordinators and subject leaders, you know, who have devised the curriculum in order that training and learning materials all come together. Now, the last one, digital infrastructure, is the integration of a number of different elements that will support learning and will support teaching and also support data collection for a variety of areas. Now, the first three, the curricular requirements, the training requirements, and the requirements for writing self-instructional materials are often, you know, available within the digital repository or the kind of infrastructure that you create within your institution. But the institutional commitment to all of this is critical because within the digital infrastructure, you're looking at integrating various networks, social networks, learning networks, and content networks. You're integrating these, and you're going to give guidance on how students can actually access and make sense of what is best for each course and for each assignment that is given to students. You can have a repository, but the repository doesn't just contain a digital library, which is digital books, but also multiple forms of learning resources, which are videos, which are tutorial playbacks, which are lectures that have already been delivered, which are PowerPoint slides, and so on and so forth. So that repository has to be available, and a network of interactive tools must be made available to access the repository and to make sense of it. And then the data that you collect on student assessment, data on access of your digital learning management system, and the whole plan for every individual student, all of those data actually feed into the decisions you make about policy and the plans you make for the program. So you see, all of these four come together as parts of a whole to deliver on institutional readiness. They are broadly defined here. There are many details for each one of these components, but institutional readiness requires that individual institutions embarking on ODL programs must give due consideration to these areas and to have a very strong commitment to follow through on every one of these areas in terms of planning and policy. Next slide, please. Now, the earlier comment I made about student readiness is critical because there are a lot of assumptions that are made about student capacity, that mere access is sufficient, or that students being adults have memory heuristics which they can draw on in order to follow a program of study in higher institutions. We also make assumptions about working adults who are upskilling or who are shifting careers. But our experience suggests that there are many gaps in student capacity that need to be bridged. This comment does not just apply to ODL. Often, even in full-time conventional courses, also student capacity might require to be bridged. And, institutional readiness is also about being ready to provide for student capacity building. Now, one of the areas that might support students is some degree of assessment and some level of learning support in terms of the kinds of skills that students bring to the program. And some of these things are based on simple surveys. They can be based on a question that is asked during enrollment or when students apply to a university. And there are questions around barriers to learning access. Just having a computer does not mean that learning will be ensured or access will be ensured. There are many other aspects of the digital infrastructure that must become, must be part of that learning process. Digital skills, learning skills, and literacy skills are very important in higher education, as are self-management and study plans. We have found through many research outcomes that learning skills and literacy skills are areas where students experience the most gaps, and they can affect learning and achievement. And if the institution can develop student capacity in these areas prior to a program or as part of the program, building into the curriculum tasks that will build their learning skills and literacy skills, then the student will find it a lot more facilitative for achieving learning and learning outcomes for the program. Now, the other part of this learning support is learning independence. The distance between the learner and the institution, between the learner and other learners, as well as the distance between the learner and the institution, can be bridged through various networks that provide for instruction and learning and continuously develop independent and self-directed learning skills. we've found that there's been a lot of research on self-direction and self-directed learning and how it is linked to independence and success in ODL programs. And this is something, again, that can be built into the curriculum itself, where the content is delivered through a number of tasks which ensure that, or which foster some degree of autonomy and self-directedness. The third area of student capacity building is the monitoring and assessment. And this requires the ODL institution to be in touch with the learner's capacity and the learner's achievement over time, within a semester, within a course, as well as throughout the program. And learner self-assessment can be a part of this monitoring system as formative ways of assessing learners and providing the learner access to feedback and growth mechanisms. There has to be in the policy and the planning of the ODL institutions program, there has to be within that planning some mechanisms where students will find, which students will find useful for understanding their learning and to receive feedback and growth. And you can build this into the coursework, you can build this into instruction, and you can build this into the KPIs for the teacher and the instructor. The other and the fourth area is persistence and resilience. You will find that there is a great deal of literature on this in terms of higher education as well as ODL. And we find that mentoring and advisory frameworks, which are linked to growth mechanisms, which are linked to learning access and feedback mechanisms, are also useful in building student capacity. And these can be done throughout the program. They don't have to be done at a pre-program level. They can be imbibed within the first semester as areas of development that students can lean on, and student groups can be developed early on and encouraged to create a sense of belonging and to provide learning support for all learners. Now, this area cannot be overstressed because developing student capacity is, in my experience, something that is very, very important for ensuring persistence and for ensuring resilience in ODL programs. Next slide, please. The literature on self-directed learning spans many decades, and I have just brought in two particular studies that have spanned the 18 years, and you'll find that self-directed learning is something that is not new, but it has been explored for a long time. But I'm highlighting these two because of their particular relevance over the years to ODL institutions and to ODL environments. The first study by Harun has highlighted a very, very important element in that web-based learners are not ready in their, in terms of self-directed learning. And there's a need for institutions, particularly ODL institutions which rely a lot on web-based interaction to provide students with the knowledge, skills, and support to be more ready for SDL. The other is that universities that offer web-based distance education must facilitate, they must be able to facilitate that, and hence my assertion about developing student capacity. The second article which I'm using to highlight this requirement for ODL is, or rather a commitment by ODL institutions, is by Nasri Halim and Abu Talib. And this is a very useful article in thinking about university curricula and how the university itself can, if the university follows very traditional ways of delivering the content and delivering the outcomes, or rather the various elements of the curriculum, you can potentially inhibit self-directed learning. So teaching methods that actually develop the learner and not focus on memorization, and teaching methods that allow for learning independence will help support your ODL program a lot more, and also, lead to a lot of transferable skills which will benefit them in the workplace. Next slide, please. The word interaction here, and it's linked to ODL readiness for any higher education provider, has to be thought of as part of delivery and part of knowledge construction. The LMS is by itself a facilitative development. The ELMS is important for ODL institutions, but the interactions within the LMS and outside of the LMS are very, very critical to ensure student success in teaching and student success in learning and in achieving program outcomes. Now, the first of these elements is optimal and complementary use of input formats, as well as collaborative formats, independent work, group work, and assessment. Now, what I mean by this is that institutions have to make decisions about how input formats such as in-person and online lectures, input through tutorials, readings, library resources, and so on, actually complement group structures such as collaboration and group tasks. Now, the interaction design has to take cognizance of how much input is required and how frequently it is required in order for students to get sufficient, base content to move on to tasks. All of these have to be balanced. Traditionally, there was an input format, and then there was a lot of independence assumed on the task or on the part of the student to go out there and meet other students and meet lecturers and perform their tasks or carry out assignments. Now, within the ODL format, we are looking at self-instructional materials, experiences, workplace settings, and tutorials and library resources to inform that learning framework. So what we design for the learner has to take cognizance of a balance of all of these different elements and how they complement one another. So a lecture can be complemented by an individual task or a group task, and how a lecture and a group task is linked to the learning outcome for a program is how you would make a decision. Additionally, collaborative structures such as group tasks, online, in-person interaction projects, real-life tasks, all will be, will build on input formats that the university makes decisions on and allow learners to grow and work on the requirements for a course. Now, the fourth area, application and knowledge construction, is often a challenge, and it is something that a lot of learning outcomes are linked to and program outcomes are linked to. However, I believe it does not receive as much attention as it ought to. Mere information retrieval, merely accessing information and looking at it and repeating it does not constitute learning. We need to get students to understand that through, collaboration, through attending lectures, working on materials, reading, accessing library resources, and so on, through all of these, they need to work on the information they've retrieved and process it with, in terms of the tasks that they are required to do, and then to apply them, apply this new understanding and new knowledge to other tasks and to the assessment requirements that are being given out to students. So the open distance learning interaction design is a very critical part of readiness. And this design is, something that takes into account your digital infrastructure, the training that you have provided, and how different aspects of the institution, how different components of open and distance learning, as well as how all the different staff who are involved in ODL in that institution come together to deliver programs that are meaningful and will ensure learning. Next slide, please. So in all of this, I think it is necessary to build capacity within the institution and to look at macro, micro, and continuous ways of building capacity in open and distance learning. So the institution that is offering an ODL program has to build capacity in open distance learning so that staff and students have the knowledge and the know-how to actually run ODL programs successfully. Now, this is a gap in some institutions. This is why we have COPPA. This is why we have standards. This is why we have knowledge building activities and workshops, so that ODL institutions that wish to provide such programs, and this is the trend now, and it is going to become something that we must continue to provide over time. In order for this to happen successfully, we have to develop and build our own capacity to deliver. So some of the areas under macro level training and macro level development is the institutional understanding of the ODL model that has been adopted, and the institutional understanding of the digital infrastructure that is going to be put in place. What do we need to do in terms of digitalization, and what kind of model do we need to adopt in order that we can take care of all of these areas that I have outlined in the readiness section. So the macro level training and development also has to involve ways of enrolling students, qualifications required, marketing. Are we marketing something that we don't have? Or are we marketing something that is going to be useful to students, onboarding individuals? We also look at training and development at a macro level, institutional level of coordination of activities in multi-site learning centers. Now, a lot of institutions have more than one location for providing the program. And one of the critical elements here is how we coordinate this, how everyone is on the same page, and how through online interaction means and paper-based means we can bring people on board to be aware of the same requirements for different centers. The other thing that is often overlooked is how students are assessed and how graduation is ensured. This has to be laid out from beginning to end. It isn't just a question of passing exams and finishing assignments and merely, achieving the requirements for the 3 credits or 4 credits for a course. It's about how courses are stacked, how assessment occurs, the multiple forms of assessment that are taking place, and how learning outcomes are actually achieved through different assessment formats. And this, I believe, is something that this conversation must happen at an institutional level. It isn't just the individual who is, the course coordinator or the course leader or the subject specialist who is going to think about assessment infrastructure. It's broader than the individual. The second area is continuous online and in-person training and development. And this, for the learner, the development of skills, independent learning skills and other skills is important, as is the monitoring of learning and learner self-assessment. So the training for how to monitor, the training for how learners can self-assess and grow, through that, the training and the development for staff and students to provide access to feedback and growth mechanisms. Now, this is continuous. This goes on. And if things shift here, then if things shift at the macro level, that must inform the training at the online, at the continuous and micro level as well. Finally, at the micro level and where training is targeted for smaller groups, they come out of the understanding at the macro level, and it comes out of a understanding of how the ODL program is to be run. And these may be curricular expectations, outcomes, at a subject level, pedagogical skills, how data on teaching and learning is collected for subjects and for programs, and how they inform ODL policy at a macro level. And also the cognizance for all staff, management, academic, and support staff about credit transfer fee structure, the role of each member of the staff within that model itself. So, some of these things in capacity building, some of these activities would occur before you launch your ODL program, and some are continuous, and some may take different shapes and form, with time. But they are also a very necessary component of, delivering ODL programs that are effective. Next slide, please. Now, there are many, many challenges that institutions face in ODL. I have listed 4, which I think could make or break your program. And one of them is student persistence, the commitment to a program of study and bearing responsibility for learning. This, as I said before, is part of capacity building, it's part of student readiness, as well as continuous growth. It is a common understanding that in a lot of ODL institutions, student persistence is usually at a low level, and we need to build that capacity for students to be able to stay and to retain the numbers that we have, simply because students have the ability, and they just need guidance most of the time, and they can learn how to bear responsibility for self-directedness. And in line with this is student self-management, where they bear responsibility for developing the skills to follow the requirements of a program, and to also make effective study plans and manage their time well. Now, the other 2 areas which are incumbent upon the institution to work on is the interaction design, the pedagogical skills, the interaction design, assessment formats, and also the institutional commitment to service quality, which can be very, very important in delivering effective programs. The last item, effectiveness of communication, is critical as it affects a lot of areas, elements related to logistics, instruction, and resources, particularly when you run multi-site, run a program in multi-site locations. Thank you. Next slide, please. Now, I have outlined a number of different areas that require attention, and all of these collectively in terms of success factors contribute to readiness and capacity building, and also contribute to the program success. And the few that I have listed here are student self-direction, curricula that allow for self-directed learning, interaction that facilitates learning, guidance, access, skills, varied forms of assessment. The more data you have on student capacity, more forms of assessment you have, the better understanding you have about student capacity, frequent feedback, monitoring, and of course, accreditation for the program. Next slide, please. With this, I end my presentation. Thank you for your attention, and we will now proceed to look at the discussion on these presentations. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Professor Kuldeep, for the in-depth sharing on institutional readiness and some of the things that IHLs who intend to embark on the ODL journey, some of the things that you should look out for. So I think the sharing is much relevant, and Prof. Kuldeep has also shared some of the good practices that's happening among the institutions of higher learning, particularly the open universities, which would probably be beneficial to all those newer players who intend to start off offering programs through the ODL mode. I believe many of the participants here have requested for the slides to the presentation. So for your information, the link to the slides will be made available to you after the webinar, and this link can actually be found on the YouTube channel at the description. So if you have missed some portions of the webinar, or if you intend to listen in again, please feel free to do so at your convenience. You may find the slides parked at the description on the YouTube channel. So let's begin our Q&A session. I believe there are many questions that we have received from our participants. Let me start by sharing some of the observations that we have based on the submissions of application made by institutions of higher learning. Now, as much as MQA has opened up its doors to enable conventional institutions to start offering ODL programs, some of these observations we have found when MQA does evaluation of those programs. And we hope by sharing these observations with you, institutions of higher learning can then be more cautious of their submission so that the application would have the intended outcome that they would prefer. So based on our observations, many of institutions of higher learning are actually jumping into the bandwagon of offering ODLs. So are they really ready? We hope some of the pointers that has been given by our panelists would be able to shed some light to these institutions. Among the critical observations made by MQA in some of the ODL submissions were related to areas such as SIM, the platform, assessment, and of course the coordinating departments. These are some areas in which institutions must pay attention to during the submission, right? Basically, let me pose the first question to our panelists. So during the evaluation made by MQA, we often find that institutions submit PowerPoint presentations as part of the SIM, self-instructional materials, to be given to the students during the delivery. So many of these institutions have questioned whether do they need to develop their own SIM. Can this SIM be actually a compilation of other resources available publicly or from other open online resources? So probably Dr. Andy, if you would like to comment on this.
Yeah, thank you, Lillian. Lillian, I think when I read through the comments posted by fellow colleagues in the Pigeonhole, I think this is quite a prominent question or ambiguity that we need to iron out here. Now, remember just now when we were when we were running through the COPPA ODL and also the briefing by Prof. Kudip, we did touch on the basic features of a self-instructional material or self-learning materials. Now, firstly, I think there must be some kind of structure in terms of what contributes a self-instructional material or what contributes a good self-learning materials. Now, in any learning materials, these are actually guiding the learners to learn in the absence of the presence of the teacher. So usually these materials in the past are all in printed base. Right now, they are all uploaded in the learning management system. And in the learning management system, there are institutions have segregated them based on the units or based on the lessons embedded in the course content. So in a nutshell, I think what a SIM would require or need to have in the self-learning material or self-instructional material would be there must be uniformity in a way, there must be a standard structure. For example, you may have to prescribe the number of units in a course, all right? Probably, let's say, from 5 to 8 unit in a course or 5 to 8 modules in a course. And there would be an introduction, there would be a course learning outcome, there would be the body content. Now, the body content of the course here can be directing the learners to the various multimedia links, to YouTube's, to the content in Coursera. Now, I understand there are certain institutions now, they are leveraging on those ready-made content by Open Learning and Coursera. Yes, they are all self-instructional based or self-learning based material. But the question here would be, would the course that is embedded there match the course content of the institution? And I believe there would not be 100% matching. So when we look at the body of content, yes, we may direct them to there or whichever multimedia materials that they have. So this is the body of content. Then, of course, there must be self-paced learning or self-paced activities embedded in the instructional materials, whether it is printed based or whether it is via the online. And there must be a summary, there must be a reference list to the students. So all this would contribute to what a SIM should look like. And above all, like Prof. Kudip would agree with me, I think what the institution would need is actually a guide to the learners to help them connect the dots, connecting the dots of the entire course structure. If there are 10 units in a course, they have to be able to connect these 10 units, the dots of these 10 units, and guide the learner in the entire journey of the semester. And of course, the other basic features of a SIM or self-learning material would be it has to be written in a conversational writing style. So meaning If there is a guide that is wrapping around a textbook or wrapping around a course material embedded in Coursera or etc., then it should be written in a conversational writing style. And apart from that, of course, the feature on self-directed, self-paced, the self-learning activities, self-contained. Self-contained, in a way, it is trying to say whatever the learner needs to know about the course content is all there, whether it is a link or it is a supplementary reading material. But what I need to caution colleagues here would be mindful of the copyright issues. If you are using the open educational resources, of course, we will be stating the Creative Commons license. If you are using materials that are owned by, let's say, Coursera or Open Learning, there will be some implication or things that we need to look at the copyright aspect, all right? Or for any other reference material. So be mindful of this copyright thing when we are developing our self-instructional material. And this is why we need a centralized unit or coordination unit to look at all these related issues. That is my take on the self-instructional material or self-learning materials. And probably if Prof. Kudip, you have anything to add on, please feel free, Prof. Kudip.
Yes, Prof.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes. Yes, of course, I agree with all the elements that you've pointed out. The idea of writing self-instructional materials is relatively new to most Malaysian instructors. And very often institutions, task their instructional staff to write self-instructional materials. What really happens is that the content is transferred onto paper or onto some kind of digital tool, and it may not allow the instructor to understand that content that is transferred from one format to another is actually going to be digested. Input is not always intake. Therefore, perhaps what is required, as Dr. Andy says, is a team to actually run those training sessions, prepare those templates, prepare those formats that are required, that have been tried and tested, and also to have conversations with other ODL institutions about what is best practice in preparing SIM. SIM cannot be overstressed, actually, as we have indicated a short while ago. And what you want is for the student to sort of have a sense of the teacher presence, the sense of being guided by someone who is not there. That is what self-instruction is. In the way that we've conceived of it in the many open universities in Malaysia, we have encouraged instructors to actually share these materials with each other and to see whether they are viable for for learning, and whether they are viable for dissemination into to the student population. So if instructors can have those workshops, if teams can be built for writing materials, and also if teams can be built within the institution to actually prepare guiding principles or frameworks for presenting this, the content that is required, it would take the ODL institution a long way for providing access to learners.
Yes. Panelists, what are your takes about having a standardized SIM across the institution? Or do we leave it to the owner of the course to develop their own online materials? Because I am sure to a certain extent, institution would want to have an institutional branding or a trademark on their materials that has been developed. Would you encourage like flexibility given, or would it be somewhat like a standardized structure for the institution?
I think, Lillian, I would go for the standardization part. Otherwise, can you imagine if I'm a bachelor degree student or a master degree student taking on 13 courses at a master level, and I'm seeing various structures of SIM being adopted by different lecturers or even certain faculties, because some courses may be from faculty A, B, and C. I agree that it should not restrict the autonomy of the academics, but there must be some kind of structure that would guide the academic staff in designing the self-learning materials or self-instructional materials. Otherwise, everybody would have their own style, font size, type font, or whatever it is. Then it will confuse the students, and there is no more the identity of the institution there.
Yeah. Can I liken the SIM to be like the WASE application that we use? It is it contains instructions to help the the driver reaches its destination.
Correct. Yes.
So instead of institutions plucking resources from all over, there must be somewhat likened to an instructor's manual, perhaps like a user's manual, to actually guide the student. Okay, when you are here, this is what the references you'll be linked to. So could I liken it to like a Waze or a Google Map application?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, in terms of where MQA matters, institutions who intend to submit ODL programs, during the submission of provisional accreditation, we would expect that these self-instructional materials for all courses within the first semester to be ready upon application to MQA. Right. So in your submission of programs, your MQA 01, institutions of higher learning, if you are listening in, please ensure that you have at least SIM prepared for the first semester of the program which you intend to offer. And of course, having said that, we would then, and before you are allowed to embark on recruiting students, you must have at least SIM for the first year of the program ready before its implementation. And when MQA comes in for the full accreditation visit, please ensure that all the SIMs are readily available to the students. So this is probably some pointers that institutions of higher learning would like to look out for. Now, possibly another issue that is also very common among institutions of higher learning is the platform in order to deliver the ODL program. So perhaps MQA has stated that institutions must have their own electronic platform, the learning platform, or the learning management system. What are your takes about having third-party offerings handling the LMS of the university? Could it have been developed in-house? And what are the panelists' take about your views about some institutions asking, could Zoom or Google Meet be part of the LMS to be delivering the programs? Panelists, Prof. Kuldeep?
Thanks, Lillian. Yes and no. So the purpose of the learning management system, and especially one that is digitalized, is to actually provide, for a number of different functions. One is a repository, another is interaction, and third, data collection, and also capacity building and developing solutions for learning. So what happens is that if you just rely on Zoom or any of the other available platforms, you're not going to be able to take care of all of these different functions that are required in ODL. So what you need is something that you can either buy or create. You can use open source or any of these mechanisms, but the important thing is it must be fit for purpose. The ODL institution must have an understanding of the infrastructure that they want to build, and which is what I talked about in terms of institutional readiness. The institution itself must have a policy, they must have a model, they must think about the ODL formats that they are going to utilize in order to allow for learning to occur and allow for interaction to occur. So, you can always use the many commercially available platforms, but those would be reserved for events where you are going to use, where you're going to invite non-staff and non-students. But for your own students and for all the different purposes that I've outlined in my talk just now, you would need something built for the institution, and the institution must have a lot of investment in it in terms of time and input, but the look and feel of the LMS. Thank you.
Dr. Andy, would you like to add on?
Yeah, I think there were quite a number of questions posted in the Pigeonhole as well in relation to this LMS thing. As what my colleague Prof. Godet has mentioned, there must be commitment from the institution to have a dedicated LMS. And the dedicated LMS, as correctly pointed out, it must have the various tools that we talk about. It must have the content propagation tool, the collaborative learning, the assessment tool, allowing plugins, allowing integration with other systems, and also allowing us to harvest the nebulous data that may be residing in the system. And this is where we could actually help to personalize learning of the learners. And also the other question that I observed posted in the Pigeonhole was, can we use different system where we consolidate it as a cluster of system as our learning management system? Now, my advice is it will be better to have one to cater for all, because otherwise, at the end of the day, students will get very confused. When you're doing forum, you're using the system. When you're doing other asynchronous activities, you're using another system. So it is always good to have one gateway, one LMS, dedicated LMS to cater for the various needs of the students. In short, the LMS is actually your physical classroom, so to speak, all right, where it congregates or it helps the convergence of learners and teachers in the same platform.
Yeah, because having institutions having to develop self-instructional materials, having to have a platform to support the online delivery, I think this could probably mean a huge amount of investment to be made by the institutions of higher learning. So we would understand that if it's going on a big scale, then this would probably require the management's consideration. But for those smaller players, who are also trying to test water of how they can deliver the programs online. So will there be a requirement such as in terms of like having a dedicated unit or a team within the institution? Like I believe like institutions are doing this on a smaller scale. Would they then be allowed to actually run this as a trial and error, like instead of having a unit or a dedicated department to handle ODL, because they are probably not very certain of how they want to take this on a scale which is either just temporary or otherwise.
But Lillian, even though they may be running it on a trial and error basis, I mean, within the quotation of trial basis here, they must also fulfill the minimum standards of running a program. So we may not be looking at a dedicated unit or center, but there must be at least a committee or a task force to ensure there is proper coordination in terms of the delivery of the LMS. And I think if you're going for the commercial MS platform, the cost would be quite high. But having said that, we must also be mindful that there are a lot of open source software that have been used by many renowned institutions, especially the open universities, using the Moodle-based platform. And I think the cost would not be actually burning the pockets of the resources in the institution. So this is where they can actually look at that point. And coming back to the dedicated unit, if they are starting it at a very small scale, we have to at least have a certain task force or committee, or very least a very small unit or collective of people to ensure there is a standard process put in place in the delivery of the entire chain of learning support services to these students.
Prof. Kuldeep, what is your take about the attrition rate of students who are undergoing the ODL programs? I mean, given the experience that you have across some of the open universities, I think one of the concerns are actually the attrition rate of students. So how can this actually be somewhat avoided? What's your take on this?
Thanks, Lillian. I think, your open universities all over the world and in Malaysia experience very high attrition rates, which is why I have highlighted the need for focus on student persistence and student, resilience. What often happens is that the marketing of programs focuses on access, it focuses on ease of access to a program of study, which the learner may not otherwise be able to achieve. So the marketing must also expose the realities of going through an ODL program as a student. You require a lot of skills in self-management and self-directed learning. I cannot emphasize this enough. I tell my students who enroll in ODL programs that they must dedicate time, they must dedicate and invest in skill building and upskilling themselves. It is not, just a case of, putting in your enrollment form and putting in, the fees for the program. It is a lot of personal investment. It is a lot of time. It is a lot of catching up to do for those people who have, not been in education for a long time. So there must be within the institution a commitment to actually keeping students on the program and actually working with them. Hence the advisory role, the mentoring role that the institution must play, the frequent hand holding that must occur in ODL programs. It is not ever a case of just because they're adults they will stay within the program. There are many commitments that adults have, and this program is just one of the many commitments. So the institution must be aware of that work that is required to keep attrition low and to keep persistence high. Thank you.
Dr. Andy, anything to add on?
No.
All right, okay. Because I believe even during our session of Q&A happening currently, it is actually based on after we have reviewed those questions on the pigeonhole, I believe there are still many questions on the pigeonhole. Most of them are circling around the same issues such as the self-instructional material, the platform, and some other questions as well. But given the time that we have, what we are going to do is actually we're going to leave the pigeonhole open for another 3 more days so that participants can actually ask further questions. And if you have missed the earlier part of the webinar, and if you have listened back, perhaps you have questions later on. So we're going to keep the pigeonhole open for another 3 more days. And the answering part will also be made there. For institutions of higher learning who have additional questions relating specifically to the implementation of ODL, you may also come to MQA during our Hari Mesra Pelanggan, which is now currently done virtually twice every month, so that we are able to provide you the appropriate advice specific to your needs and the issues that you face. So of course, we are not able to answer all the questions today, but we would encourage you to also come to MQA, set up an appointment with us so that we are able to explain to you or clarify some issues based on your specific needs. At the same time, I would also like to take this opportunity to inform that the MQA Training Center does provide specific trainings relating to the COPPA ODL, and these could actually be done by request. So in the event, institutions of higher learning, if you require specific trainings tailor-made to your institutions, please also get in touch with our MQA TC, our MQA Training Center. A bit of the promotion, right? So, okay, again, as much as we try to consolidate all the questions that we have from the pigeonhole and answered during our session earlier on, again, like I've mentioned, we will also try to address all other questions that are posed to us. Just keep an eye on the pigeonhole later. So because time is probably not on our side, and I think we have overshot the time given, perhaps Prof. Kuldeep, on your side, any last words or any pointers that you would like to give to our listeners here today before we wrap up? Like, please share with them some tips on embarking on the ODL. Any last pointers from yourself?
I think one of the things that works to their benefit is to visit other open universities, to organize talks from them, and to see, you know, all the different things that need to be done in order to actually launch an ODL system within your conventional university, because that appears to be the trend these days, that conventional universities are actually offering ODL programs. The second thing that I would like to say is that if you have received institutional commitment for ODL, know that this is a long journey, both for the institution and for the learner. It is not a case of, you know, all students being equal and all students being able to complete their program of study. I think the patience is the patience to work this through is an important part of an ODL institution. The other thing is that the guidance that you provide cannot just be semantic. It cannot just be a link on your LMS. It has to be substantive, so that, you know, students are actually supported all the way. You know, the ODL programs that we have right now are often confused with online programs. And this is something I must caution a lot of institutions, that open and online are two different things, and distance and online are also different things. So to know about the full gamut of activities that are required for any ODL program is to learn from other people's experiences, and it would be useful to organize those visits before you make a decision about your own ODL program. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thank you, Prof. Kuldeep. I think that's a very good suggestion from yourself. Institutions may want to consider doing some benchmarking or probably some visits to learn from the bigger brothers or bigger players in the market before starting on. And we also encourage these institutions with more experience to also share some of the good practices that you have to encourage the smaller players to come on board. Dr. Andy, any last advice from yourself?
Okay, probably some parting remarks here, Lillian. I think the greatest disruptor in higher education is definitely the COVID pandemic. And we understand very well that when the pandemic knocked on the doors globally, higher education has actually moved to online learning. So in a way, when we talk about open distance learning, the online learning is actually part of the ODL delivery. So I believe in years to come, there will only, or rather there will be convergence of this conventional and online learning falling under the umbrella of ODL. So in a way, in future, we may be looking at a blended learning comprising the physical elements as well as the online learning elements. So I guess it is good for every house to get their act in proper order, looking at how to consolidate and how to facilitate learning through online learning. And all this, I think they can actually learn from the open distance learning institutions or conventional institutions that have successfully run the ODL program. It is how they increase the face-to-face contact hours in a conventional blended learning program. So I guess that is what we would like to share. There would definitely, the blurring of line between conventional and online learning program is bound to happen. It's just a matter of time. All right. Bak kata pepatah, kalau mudik sudah sampai ke hulu, kalau hanyut sudah sampai ke kuala. So this is a pantun for all who have attended this morning's session. Rios kampung kita berkumpul, bertukar pendapat, bertemu minda. Pandangan ramai bersama disimpul. ODL mantap tegak membina. This is from us all to participants this morning.
Thank you, Dr. Andy. Thank you so much. Thank you, Associate Professor Dr. Andy and Professor Dr. Kuldeep Kaur for your insightful sharing and valuable pointers today. To all the institutions of higher learning, those participants who have joined us today, who intend to embark on this ODL journey, kindly ensure that you have met all the requirements set out within the scope of the COPPA ODL. And those who have already embarked on this journey, make sure that you protect the program and ensure the quality of its implementation well. We hope that the participants have benefited from this webinar, this session. And to all our participants who have faithfully stayed with us till the end, be it mentally or spiritually, we thank you so much for your participation. We hope that you have enjoyed the session today. And if there are some topics that would be of interest to institutions of higher learning, please drop us a note so that we can organize some sessions, particularly relating to quality assurance, to be shared with all of the institutions of higher learning. So with that, till we meet again, stay safe, everyone, and be blessed in the new normal. Thank you, and we apologize for any glitches or any technical, errors along the way. But we hope the session has been beneficial to all. So thank you, everyone. Take care, and we look out on the pigeonhole for any further announcement or answers to your question.
And Lillian, Selamat Hari Raya to all of them celebrating.
I would also take this opportunity to wish our Muslim friends, colleagues, Selamat Hari Raya Aidilfitri. It's just a week away. Please follow SOPs, and we wish you a very good day ahead. Thank you, everyone. Maaf Zahir Batin.
Maaf Zahir
Selamat
Batin.
Raya.
Hari Raya.
Okay, till we meet
Bye.
again. Thank
Bye,
you.
bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
goodbye.